October 6, 1942. A press conference in Berlin. Cameras, correspondents, the watchful presence of the Reich's chief propagandist. And at the center of it, a soldier in uniform, jaw set, voice carrying the ease of a man who has never needed to doubt himself in public. He leans forward slightly. He speaks. Today we have the gates of Egypt in hand, and with the intent to act. 17 days after he said those words, the British opened the largest artillery barrage since the Somme. When it began, Rommel was not in Africa. He was in Germany, in a sickbed. He had no idea it was coming. He was born in 1891, the son of a schoolmaster in the Württemberg town of Heidenheim. Nothing about his origins suggested a legend. He joined the army in 1910, fought on 3 fronts in the First World War, and won Prussia's highest decoration for valor, the Pour le Mérite, for an assault in the Italian mountains that ended with the capture of an entire enemy division. The young Rommel did not wait for orders. He moved and trusted the enemy to be too slow to catch him. That instinct stayed with him for the rest of his life. After the war, he wrote a book. Infantry Attacks, published in 1937, found its way to Hitler, who read it and approved. By 1940, he had a panzer division for the invasion of France. By early 1941, the newly formed Afrika Korps and a theater of war that nobody in Berlin thought mattered very much. He was sent to rescue Germany's Italian allies, who had been routed across North Africa. Within weeks, he had turned the desert upside down. The victories came in rapid succession. Gazala, May 1942, a panzer encirclement that shattered the 8th Army's line. Tobruk, June 1942, 33,000 prisoners, a fortress taken in a single day, the British in flight all the way back into Egypt. Smoke over Alexandria. The British burning their papers in anticipation of what they expected was coming. In Berlin, the propaganda machinery turned on at full power. Rommel was the Desert Fox, the only German commander given his own press conference, attended by international press, moderated by Goebbels himself. By October 1942, he was one of the most celebrated soldiers in the world. The Goebbels press conference was its own spectacle. Staged, controlled, the myth being manufactured in real time. He declared that he held the gates of Egypt. The cameras recorded it. The world received it. But there was another voice. A private one. Written at night in letters to his wife, Lucy, dictated into a running diary he had kept since the first days in the desert. And that voice told a different story entirely. On July 3, 1942, 3 months before the press conference in the immediate aftermath of his first failed attempt to break through at El Alamein, Rommel wrote in his diary, "Our strength has waned. With only 13 battle-worthy tanks we had arrived before Alamein." The next day, a letter to Lucy. "Things are, unfortunately, not going as we should like. The resistance is too great and our strength is exhausted. The resistance is too great, our strength is exhausted." July 4th. The press conference was October 6th. The audience in that Berlin hall did not know what the man at the podium had written 3 months earlier, in the dark, to his wife. They heard confidence. He was performing confidence he no longer felt for an audience that needed it. And somewhere in the widening space between what he said and what he wrote, the story of El Alamein was already taking shape. What closed around Rommel in October 1942 began with the ground. El Alamein was a tiny desert railway halt, 60 miles west of Alexandria. Flat, sun-bleached, scrubby, buff-colored sand broken by low ridges and shallow depressions. By day, the temperature reached 90 degrees Fahrenheit. By night, it dropped sharply, and the sand held the cold like stone. At dawn, a brief golden chill. At noon, white glare that warped distances, until a man couldn't trust his own eyes. What mattered most about El Alamein was not what was there. It was what was on either side. To the north, the Mediterranean. To the south, the Qattara Depression, a vast inland sea of quicksand and salt marsh, 60 miles deep, impassable to any heavy vehicle. The flanks were sealed by nature. You could not go around. You could only go straight ahead. The whole of Rommel's military genius was built on movement. Wide flanking arcs, sudden thrusts. The principle of getting inside the enemy's decision cycle before they could react. Leading from the front, issuing orders, moving faster than anyone expected. Take that away. Pin him to a fixed line, force him to fight straight. And you removed the weapon. El Alamein did exactly that. It turned the Desert Fox into a garrison commander. And behind those sealed flanks, the numbers told their own story. Montgomery commanded more than 190,000 men. British, Australian, New Zealand, South African, Indian, Greek, Free French, Polish. Rommel had approximately 116,000, roughly half German, half Italian. Montgomery had around 1,100 tanks, including the newly arrived American Sherman with its superior gun and armor. Rommel had 547, and many of his were Italian models that could not survive a direct engagement with a Sherman. Montgomery had nearly 900 artillery pieces. Rommel's supply lines, battered by British naval and air interdiction, had been delivering roughly 40% of what his army needed. 40%. The army that was supposed to hold the gates of Egypt had been surviving on less than half its required fuel, ammunition, and replacements. Rommel knew all of this. He had written about it in July. He had written about it in August, before his last offensive attempt, Alam Halfa, launched on August 30th, in a private letter to Lucy. I have worried so much about this day, but I am taking the risk because I will not have another chance. So much is at stake. That offensive walked straight into a prepared position. Montgomery had been expecting it. In fact, he had arranged for Rommel to receive a falsified map of the terrain. Rommel's armor became bogged down in unexpected soft ground, came under concentrated artillery and air attack, and withdrew having achieved nothing. The last throw had failed. What Rommel did not know, what he could not know, was why Montgomery always seemed to be waiting for him. The answer was not prescience, it was intelligence. The Allies had broken the German Enigma code. Through a program called Ultra, British signals analysts were reading the encoded communications between Rommel's headquarters and Berlin. Every tank count, every supply request, every operational plan that Rommel sent up the line. Montgomery was reading his opponent's mail. He knew what Rommel had, where he had it, and, critically, that Rommel was not in Africa. He was in Germany, recovering from stomach ailments, nasal diphtheria, and circulatory problems. He had concluded, privately, that the war in Africa could no longer be won. In his absence, temporary command of Panzerarmee Africa had passed to General der Panzertruppe Georg Stumer, a compact monocled general the troops called Fireball, a man known to suffer from chronically high blood pressure. On the night of October 23rd, 1942, that was the man holding the line. Montgomery has chosen this night deliberately. The moon is full, the light needed for infantry moving through minefields in the dark. The Axis defensive belt runs deep, approximately 500,000 mines, miles of barbed wire, prepared infantry positions, armored reserves waiting behind to counterattack any penetration. Stumer is at his headquarters, following the plan Rommel left him, waiting. At 9:40 in the evening, nearly 900 guns open simultaneously. Witnesses describe continuous rolling thunder, the horizon flickering orange-red like a sunrise that has lost its bearings, the ground shaking underfoot. The noise is physically painful at close range. The barrage is visible from miles away. In the churned earth below, British infantry and engineers begin moving into the minefields, cutting 2 corridors through which the armor will advance. A slow, methodical, agonizing process called Operation Lightfoot. In the dark, under fire, with everything the Axis can return bearing down on them. Stumer rides forward. He needs to see what is happening. He and his signals officer, Colonel Andreas Büchting, drive toward the front without an escort. Their car comes into the open and is attacked. Büchting is shot through the head. Stumer jumps from the vehicle or is thrown. Accounts differ. The driver accelerates out of the fire. Stumer is gone. His body is found the next day, lying along the track. There are no visible wounds. He had a history of high blood pressure. The opening barrage of the Second Battle of El Alamein on its first night appears to have killed the man commanding the defense before the battle had properly begun. A heart attack, in the dark, alone. In Germany, the signal goes out. Come back. The battle has started without you. Rommel landed on October 25th. He went forward immediately. What he found was already beyond conventional repair, though the line had not yet broken. The 15th Panzer Division had 31 operational tanks remaining from an initial complement of 119. He pulled the 21st Panzer Division and the Italian Ariete Division north, plugging the most threatened sector, counter-attacking where the British had made the deepest penetrations. The fighting was close quarter, brutal, conducted in heat and fine-grained dust that worked into engines, into eyes, into everything. The minefield corridors were choked with British armor, stalled and taking punishment from Axis anti-tank guns. Both sides were bleeding. He wrote in his diary each evening. He had always done this. Dictated each night a running account of the day, a record of what happened and what it cost. The habit did not abandon him in crisis. The entries from these days were quieter than anything he had written at Gazala or Tobruk. The language was controlled. The private voice knew what the battlefield commander could not yet say aloud. In July, he had written, "Yesterday was a particularly hard and critical day. We pulled through again. But it must not go on like that for long, otherwise the front will crack." It was going exactly like that. It had been going exactly like that since the barrage opened. The front was not cracking yet, but the mathematics were merciless. Rommel had no reserve of fuel to sustain the mobile counterattacks that were his only tactical response. No reserve of tanks to absorb the losses. Montgomery did not need to defeat him in any single engagement. He only needed to keep grinding. Every night that passed, the equation shifted. Every panzer that burned was something Rommel could not replace. The desert around the Alamein line by the end of the first week was transformed. The flat scrub was littered with wreckage. Blazing tanks, twisted vehicles, rifles, and tin helmets lying in the sand alongside the hastily dug graves of men whose names most of the world would never know. Veterans who had been fighting there for 2 years said they had never seen so much smoking wreckage in one place. The battlefield had become a cemetery. And Rommel, each evening, returned to his command vehicle and dictated and wrote home to Lucy and measured the distance between what he could do and what was being asked of him. November 1st. Montgomery pauses. His lines are compressed. His armor is entangled. The breakthrough has not yet come. He regroups, reorganizes, and strikes for the last time. Operation Supercharge. November 2nd, 1:05 in the morning. The 2nd New Zealand Division, reinforced by 2 British infantry brigades, leads the assault. 350 guns. More than 50,000 rounds. An air offensive precedes the ground advance. Then the barrage opens, and the New Zealanders and their attached brigades move forward in the dark toward the last coherent line of Axis defense. To the north, Australian forces have already launched a separate assault along the Mediterranean coast. not the main effort, designed to pull Rommel's panzer reserves in the wrong direction. He moves them north. The real blow lands where he is not looking. By the time the crisis point arrives, Rommel has 90 tanks. Montgomery has 800. The numbers had always told this story. They are finishing telling it now. On November 2nd, Rommel signals Hitler. The battle is lost. He requires permission to retreat. Everything that follows is about what happens next. The reply arrives from the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Hitler has never set foot in North Africa. He has never seen the desert, never visited the front, never stood in the sand while a panzer division burned itself out a mile away. He does not know the fuel state, the tank count, the weight of Montgomery's artillery, the condition of the men he is addressing. He knows none of it. What he writes is the language of glory. As to your troops, you can show them no other road than that to victory or death. He commands Rommel not to yield even a yard of ground. Rommel had already ordered the retreat. He had begun moving German units west. Then the signal arrived, and he stopped. For approximately 36 hours, the army stands still. Men hold positions they know are untenable. Fuel burns, fuel that cannot be replaced, in vehicles going nowhere. British armor begins to maneuver around the flanks, edging toward the coast road that is Rommel's only line of escape. The resupply that Rommel's superiors had promised, the fuel convoys that were supposed to make the stand possible, sits at Benghazi, hundreds of miles to the west. It will eventually arrive. By the time it does, the German forces will already be gone. The pause that was supposed to save the army is the thing making saving it impossible. The hours pass. Nothing comes. The army stands still, and the British move. On the night of November 3rd, in the eye of it, the army halted, the flanks pressing in, the Italian infantry beginning to understand what their situation means. Rommel writes, "We are facing very difficult days, perhaps the most difficult that a man can undergo. Not the most difficult a soldier can undergo. A man." The man who had stood before Goebbels' cameras less than 4 weeks earlier and declared he held the gates of Egypt was now writing, in the dark, the language of personal apocalypse. The gap that had been there since July, since the first letter to Lucy, since the diary entry that said the strength was exhausted, had closed. There was nothing left between the public performance and the private reality. This was what had been behind the press conference. This was what the Desert Fox had been carrying. On November 4th, the stand-fast order was rescinded. Permission to retreat arrived. It was too late to matter the way it would have mattered 2 days earlier. Rommel's German units were already moving, but his Italian infantry, the Trento Division, the Bologna, the Brescia, they were not moving. They did not have motor transport. There were no trucks to carry them. The withdrawal halted for 36 hours at Hitler's order, had burned through the fuel that might have allowed an orderly retreat with the full force intact. The Italian divisions were left behind. The men of Trento, Bologna, and Brescia stood in the sand while the German columns moved west. Some tried to follow on foot. The British closed in behind them. By the time the pursuit was finished, more than 15,000 Italian soldiers had been taken prisoner, the majority captured in the open desert, on foot, without transport. An alliance that had fought together across 2 years and thousands of miles of North African sand ended here, in this particular manner. One partner running, one left to surrender. Rommel states this in his papers. He does not dramatize it. It was a logistical decision made at the extreme edge of military catastrophe, shaped by 36 hours he did not choose to lose. The record is plain enough. The retreat that followed was, in its own way, a testament to what Rommel had always been. Fewer than 40 operational tanks, outnumbered 3 to 1, critically short of fuel, a fighting withdrawal across open desert while Montgomery's forces attempted to cut off the coast road ahead. Heavy rains on November 6th turned the terrain to quagmire and briefly halted the British pursuit. Rommel slipped the trap, but the cost of slipping it was everything he had left. A fortnight after El Alamein, he was 700 miles to the west at Ajala, where the Desert War had effectively started 2 years earlier. Within 3 months, the 8th Army entered Tripoli, having advanced 1,400 miles since the opening barrage. It was the furthest west any British force had reached. It was the end of Rommel's Africa. In London, Churchill ordered the church bells rung. They had not been heard since the outbreak of war. On November 10th, at the Lord Mayor's banquet, he spoke to the occasion with characteristic precision. "This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." 3 years later, he would look back and write something closer to the full weight of what happened at El Alamein. Before Alamein, we never had a victory. After Alamein, we never had a defeat. In Berlin, the propaganda machinery did not stop. The propaganda ministry directed the media to emphasize Rommel's invincibility, to frame El Alamein as a tactical withdrawal rather than the catastrophe it was. The myth of the Desert Fox was maintained through the spring of 1943. Germany's public was not told the truth. The performance continued. The performer was no longer capable of sustaining it. Rommel survived Africa. He survived Tunisia. He came home to Europe, was assigned to command the Atlantic Wall defenses in France, and prepared for the Allied invasion he knew was coming and could not be stopped. And somewhere in 1943 and into 1944, something in him reached its conclusion. Perhaps it had been moving toward that conclusion since July 1942, since the first letter to Lucy that said the strength was gone, since the diary that said the front would crack. By 1944, Rommel had become disillusioned with Hitler, with the man, the war, the cost of believing in either. He became associated, carefully and with whatever caution his position allowed, with the conspiracy against the Führer. On July 20th, 1944, a bomb was placed under a table at Hitler's headquarters. It detonated. Hitler survived. The purge that followed was merciless and wide. Rommel's name entered the files. Men arrived at his house in October 1944. He was given a choice, a public trial before the People's Court, where the verdict was certain and his family would bear the consequences, or a private death and the official story of a hero's end from his wounds. He chose the private death. He was driven from his house on a quiet German road, away from the village, away from his family. A cyanide capsule pressed into his hand by men sent by the Führer he had served for the better part of his life. He did not come back. He was 52 years old. Before he died, he had hidden his papers, the nightly diaries, those evening dictations, the running record of each campaign, the private assessments of each day's fighting, the letters to Lucy, everything he had written and preserved across years of desert war, secreted away in concealed locations he trusted would survive the search. He hid them, and he was right too. They were found after the war. They were published. The papers are what remain. The man who stood before Goebbels' cameras on October 6, 1942, who performed certainty for an audience that needed it with the composure of a man who had decided that the performance was the only thing left behind, in hiding. His private voice, the letters, the diary entries, the admissions that accumulated through that long summer and autumn. Our strength has waned. The resistance is too great. The front will crack. So much is at stake. And finally, the line written in the desert on the night of November 3rd, 1942, with the army standing still and the flanks pressing in. We are facing very difficult days, perhaps the most difficult that a man can undergo. He was wrong about that. He could not have known he was wrong. The most difficult day of all was still 2 years away, on a quiet road in Germany, with men sent by the Führer he had served. The private voice was the honest one. It was the voice he chose to preserve, and it is the voice that outlasted everything the public one built. The press conferences, the myth, the Afrika Korps, the war, the man himself. It is still speaking.